The autistic son of the tycoon was crying in the museum until a guide did something that left the father speechless. Richard Coleman took a deep breath as he held his 5-year-old son's hand at the entrance to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. The real estate businessman had cancelled 3 important meetings that Friday morning to keep the promise he had made to the boy the previous week. Ethan began to rock his body back and forth as soon as the automatic doors opened. The sound of footsteps echoing on the marble, the voices of the other visitors, and especially the fluorescent lights on the ceiling, made him cover his ears and let out a low moan. "No, no, no," the boy repeated, still holding his father's hand, but already showing signs of discomfort. Richard knew those signs. In the last 2 years, since Ethan received his autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, he had learned to recognize when a sensory overload was beginning. The problem was, he still didn't know how to avoid or control these situations. "It's okay, Ethan, we'll take it slow," said Richard, trying to keep his voice calm. But it wasn't okay. As soon as they reached the main hall where the contemporary art pieces were displayed, Ethan let go of his father's hand and threw himself on the floor. The screams started low and grew louder as he covered his ears and rocked his body repetitively. Richard felt his face grow hot. The people around them stopped walking and started to stare. Some took their cell phones out of their bags. An elderly couple whispered something to each other, clearly bothered by the noise. "Ethan, son, let's get out of here." Richard knelt beside the boy, but he knew that touching him during a meltdown would only make things worse. It was then that a female voice sounded behind him. "Excuse me, can I help?" Richard turned and saw a young woman with curly hair and brown skin, wearing the navy blue museum uniform. She had a serene expression on her face, as if such situations were common for her. "No, thank you, I've got it," Richard replied, embarrassed. The last thing he wanted was to draw more attention, but the young lady ignored his reply and knelt on the floor a few feet away from Ethan. To Richard's surprise, she began to rock her body in the same rhythm as the boy. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, almost standing up to intervene. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a small golden cube with different textures on each face from her uniform pocket. She placed the object on the floor, between herself and Ethan, and continued rocking. The boy's screams gradually subsided. He opened one eye and fixed his gaze on the shiny cube. The young lady picked up the object and began to run her fingers over the different textures, producing soft sounds. Ethan stopped screaming completely and focused on her movements. After a few minutes, he reached a hand toward the cube. "You can take it," said the young lady in a sweet voice. "Each side is different. This one is soft like velvet. This one is rough like very fine sandpaper." Richard stood frozen, watching the scene. In 2 years of therapies, doctor's appointments, and frustrated attempts, he had never seen anyone calm Ethan so quickly. The boy held the cube and began to explore each surface. His repetitive movements decreased until they stopped completely. "Gold," said Ethan, a word he had recently learned in his occupational therapy sessions. "That's right, it's gold like the sun," the young lady agreed, keeping her voice low and steady. "Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing." Richard watched in amazement as Ethan allowed the stranger to lightly touch his hand. It was the first time in months that the boy had accepted the touch of anyone other than his parents. "How did you know what to do?" Richard asked, still in shock. "My name is Sarah," she replied, helping Ethan to stand up slowly. "I've worked here for 3 years. You're not the first father to bring a neurodivergent child to the museum." Neurodivergent? Richard repeated the word he was still learning to use. "Brains that work differently," Sarah explained. "Ethan has high sensory sensitivity. The lights, the sounds, the smells, everything here is very intense for him." Richard felt a pang of guilt. Maybe bringing Ethan to the museum hadn't been a good idea. "But that doesn't mean he can't appreciate art," Sarah continued. "We just need to adapt the experience for him." She guided father and son to a smaller room in the back of the museum, where the lighting was softer and there were fewer visitors. "This is our sensory room," Sarah explained. "We created it a few months ago for people like Ethan. The room had floor cushions scattered about, textured toys, noise-cancelling headphones, and a small collection of artworks with textures that could be touched. Ethan let go of his father's hand and walked over to a polished metal sculpture. He touched the smooth surface and smiled, one of his rare but genuine smiles. "He's smiling," Richard murmured, moved. "Art isn't just to be seen," Sarah said. "For Ethan, it can be felt, heard, experienced in other ways." They spent another 2 hours in the room. Ethan explored every object, always with Sarah nearby, explaining the textures and shapes with simple words he could understand. When they finally left the museum, Richard felt transformed. For the first time since the diagnosis, he had seen his son truly happy in a public environment. "Sarah, I'd like to talk to you about this," Richard said on the way out. "About how I can help Ethan at home." "Of course," she replied, handing him a simple card. "But I need to be honest, I'm not a trained therapist. I learned all this by taking care of my younger brother." Richard read the card. Sarah Miller, arts educator. On the back, there was a personal phone number written by hand. "Your brother is also—" Richard began. "Autistic?" "Yes. Jason is 15 now. He got the diagnosis when he was 8, and I was 18. My parents didn't know how to handle it, so I sort of became the family expert." Richard put the card in his jacket pocket. For some reason, he felt that meeting had changed something fundamental in their lives. In the car, on the way home, Ethan held the golden cube that Sarah had let him borrow. "Daddy, pretty lady," said Ethan, using one of the few complete sentences he could form. Richard smiled into the rearview mirror. Yes, she was pretty. But more than that, she had done something that he, with all his money and influence, couldn't do. She had given Ethan a moment of peace and joy. That night, Richard researched everything he could about autism spectrum disorder. He discovered that many of the approaches Sarah had used at the museum were based on therapies he didn't even know existed. Sensory therapy, auditory integration, art therapy. Over the weekend, he called Sarah. "Hello?" Her voice sounded tired. "Sarah, it's Richard, Ethan's father. I hope I'm not bothering you." No. I was just helping my brother with his homework. It's always a battle." Richard hesitated before asking the question that had been on his mind since Friday. "Would you consider giving Ethan some private sessions? At home? I can pay whatever is necessary." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, Richard, I really appreciate the offer, but I can't accept. I'm not a certified therapist, and besides, I have 3 jobs. The museum is just one of them." "3 jobs?" Richard was surprised. "Yes. I work at the museum in the morning, I tutor in the afternoon, and I clean offices at night. Jason needs occupational therapy twice a week, and it's not cheap." Richard felt something stir in his chest. That woman was working day and night to care for her brother, just as he was trying to care for Ethan. "What if I pay for Jason's therapies?" Richard offered. "In exchange for some sessions with Ethan?" "No," the answer came quick and firm. "I'm sorry, but I don't accept charity." "It's not charity," Richard insisted. "It's an exchange. You have something I need, knowledge about how to help Ethan. I have something you need, financial resources. Why don't we help each other?" Sarah was silent for so long that Richard thought she had hung up. "Let me think about it," she finally said. On Monday, Richard received a message from Sarah accepting his proposal, but with conditions. She wanted it to be a formal agreement, with a signed contract, where she would provide adapted art education services for Ethan, and in return, he would pay for Jason's therapies for 6 months. Richard agreed immediately. He had built a real estate empire by knowing how to recognize a good deal, and something in his instinct said that this was the best investment he had ever made. The first session happened on a Wednesday afternoon at Richard's mansion in the Upper East Side. The house was immense, but Richard took Sarah directly to Ethan's playroom, a room that had been carefully designed to be a safe and comfortable environment for the boy. Ethan hid behind his father when he saw Sarah enter. "He's shy," Richard explained. "He's not shy," Sarah corrected gently. "He's processing. Ethan, do you remember me? I'm the lady from the museum who lent you the golden cube." Ethan peeked from behind his father's legs and gave a slight nod. Sarah opened a backpack and took out several objects: washable paints, brushes of different sizes, papers with various textures, and some small musical instruments. "Today we're going to paint sounds," she said, sitting on the floor. Richard didn't understand what that meant, but Ethan approached, curious. Sarah played a small xylophone, producing high-pitched sounds, and dipped a brush in yellow paint. "High-pitched sounds are yellow," she said, making small dots on the paper. Then she played a small drum and picked up blue paint. "Low-pitched sounds are blue." Ethan was fascinated. He picked up a brush and began to imitate Sarah, associating colors with sounds. Within an hour, he had created his first work of art. Richard watched everything from a distance, impressed not only with Ethan's progress, but with Sarah's patience and creativity. She had transformed a simple activity into a multisensory experience that helped Ethan process the world in a more organized way. After Ethan went to have dinner with the nanny, Richard invited Sarah for coffee in his office. "Where did you learn these techniques?" he asked, pouring coffee into fine porcelain cups. "Through trial and error," Sarah replied, accepting the cup. "When Jason was little, he didn't speak. The doctors said he might never speak, so I started looking for other forms of communication." "And did it work?" "Jason started speaking when he was 10. Simple phrases at first, but he spoke. I discovered he expressed himself better through drawing and music." Richard felt admiration for that woman's determination. She had done alone, with limited resources, what he was trying to do with all his wealth: help an autistic child communicate with the world. "May I ask a personal question?" Richard said. "Where are your parents?" Sarah's face closed off a little. "My mother passed away when Jason was 7. My father, well, he didn't know how to handle the diagnosis. He said he didn't have the patience to raise a special needs child and left." "I'm so sorry," Richard said, genuinely moved. "Don't be. Jason and I did just fine together, and now he's better than ever. He's even thinking about going to college for music." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. The sessions with Ethan continued twice a week for the following month. The progress was remarkable. Ethan began using new words, tolerating changes in his routine better, and most importantly, showing interest in activities that used to make him agitated. Richard also noticed changes in himself. For the first time in years, he was leaving the office early to attend the sessions. His business meetings, which used to last for hours, were now objective and direct. He had discovered that being efficient at work gave him more time for what really mattered. One day during a particularly productive session, where Ethan had managed to paint an entire canvas without a single meltdown, Richard made an observation that surprised even himself. "Sarah, have you ever thought about opening an alternative therapy center?" She stopped cleaning the brushes and looked at him. "I have, but it would be impossible. I don't even have a college degree, and centers like that cost a fortune to set up. What if you had an investor as a partner?" "Richard, no," she said, going back to cleaning the brushes with more force. "We've talked about this. I don't accept charity." "It's not charity." Richard stood up and walked to the window. "It's an investment. You have talent, practical knowledge, and passion. I have capital and contacts. Together, we can create something that helps hundreds of children like Ethan and Jason." Sarah was silent, considering the proposal. "You don't even really know me," she said finally. "How can you trust me with an investment like that?" Richard turned to her. "Because in 6 weeks, you've done more for Ethan than 2 years of conventional therapies did. And because I see how you care for your brother. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." That night, Richard lay in bed thinking about the conversation. For the first time in a long while, he felt excited about a project that wasn't related to business. It was as if he had discovered a greater purpose for his life. Ethan, who used to cry every night because of changes in his routine, had slept peacefully after painting with Sarah. Richard knew he was on the right path. The following week, something unexpected happened. Jennifer, Richard's ex-wife and Ethan's mother, showed up at the door of the mansion without warning. Richard received her in the living room, surprised. They hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not since she had signed the divorce papers and left full custody of Ethan with him. "I need to talk about Ethan," Jennifer said, without any small talk. She was elegantly dressed, as always, but there was something different in her eyes, a coldness that Richard didn't remember seeing before. "What about Ethan?" Richard asked, immediately defensive. "I heard you're exposing our son to strangers, some supposed therapist who doesn't even have proper training." Richard felt his blood boil. "How did you find out about that? I have my contacts, and I also heard you're thinking about opening some kind of business with this person." "Jennifer, you abandoned Ethan. You have no right to show up here and criticize my decisions." "I didn't abandon him," she retorted haughtily. "I recognized that I didn't have the emotional strength to deal with his special needs. I thought it would be better for everyone." "Better for you," Richard corrected. Jennifer stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden, where Ethan was playing with the nanny. "I'm thinking about asking for shared custody," she said, without looking at Richard. The world stopped for a moment. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "You can't be serious." "I am. My lawyer says I have a chance, especially if I can prove that you are putting Ethan at risk by exposing him to unconventional therapies." "Sarah is not a risk," Richard said, trying to stay calm. "She is helping Ethan in a way no one else has before." "Sarah?" Jennifer turned with an ironic smile. "How familiar. How long have you known her? 2 months." Richard saw the trap. Jennifer was trying to suggest his relationship with Sarah was personal, not professional. "It's nothing like what you're thinking," he said. "No? Then explain to me why my ex-husband, who works 12 hours a day, is suddenly coming home in the middle of the afternoon to watch therapy sessions." Richard didn't know how to answer, because deep down, he knew Jennifer wasn't completely wrong. His conversations with Sarah had become the best part of his days, not just because of Ethan, but because she made him feel like a better person. "I'll give you a week to think about it," Jennifer said, picking up her purse. "Either you end this strange partnership, or I will seek my rights in court." After she left, Richard stood in the living room for a long time. Ethan came running in, still dirty with soil from the garden. "Daddy's sad?" the boy asked, words he had learned from Sarah during their emotional recognition sessions. Richard hugged his son, feeling a heavy heart. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his mother wants to take him away? And worse, how to explain that this might happen just when Ethan was making such good progress? "I'm not sad, son, I'm just thinking." But Richard was indeed very worried. Jennifer had the resources and connections to make his life a legal hell, and she knew his weak points, his history of being a workaholic, and his initial difficulty dealing with Ethan's diagnosis. When Sarah arrived the next day for the session, Richard greeted her with a tense expression. "We need to talk," he said. Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong. "Did something happen to Ethan?" "No, not with Ethan, but Jennifer, his mother, came here yesterday. She is threatening to file for shared custody." Sarah sat down slowly on the sofa. "And what does that have to do with me?" Richard hesitated. How to explain without sounding like he was blaming her? "She thinks I'm putting Ethan at risk by working with someone who doesn't have official therapy credentials." "I see," Sarah said, her voice growing colder. "And do you agree with her?" "No, of course not. You saved Ethan. You saved me too." "Then what is the problem?" Richard sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "The problem is that Jennifer has the power to turn this into a long, complicated legal battle, and during that process, Ethan could be affected." Sarah was silent for a long moment. "You want me to stop coming here?" It wasn't a question. "I want to protect Ethan," Richard said. "If that means pausing our work until the legal situation is resolved, then perhaps that's for the best." "It's fine," Sarah said, standing up. "I understand." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. Richard followed her. "Sarah, wait. This is temporary. As soon as I sort things out with Jennifer—" "Richard," she turned to face him. "You're right. Jennifer is right about one thing. I don't have official credentials, Maybe it is better for Ethan to work with real professionals. You are a real professional, Richard insisted. A diploma doesn't define that. But Sarah was already walking down the front steps. Richard stood in the doorway watching her walk away, feeling he had made the biggest mistake of his life. That night, Ethan asked several times where Aunt Sarah was. Richard didn't know how to explain. How do you tell an autistic child who doesn't handle change well that the person who was helping him wouldn't come anymore? Ethan had the worst meltdown in the last 2 months. He cried for hours, banged his head against the wall, and refused to eat. Richard felt completely lost. After just 1 day without Sarah, he had already forgotten how difficult it was to handle his son's meltdowns alone. In the following days, Richard tried to get back to a normal routine with Ethan. He took him back to conventional therapies, but the boy was apathetic, uninterested. He seemed to have regressed weeks of progress in just a few days. Richard also felt he was losing his way. He went back to working 12 hours a day, but now as a form of escape. He couldn't concentrate in meetings, constantly thinking about Ethan and Sarah. A week after Jennifer's visit, Richard received a call from her lawyer. "Mr. Richard, I need to inform you that my client will indeed be filing for shared custody. The hearing is scheduled for next Friday." Richard hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He contacted his own lawyer, Mr. Johnson, who had been a family friend for years. "Richard, I need to be frank with you," Mr. Johnson said during the meeting. "Jennifer has a strong case. She can argue that you drastically changed Ethan's routine, introducing unconventional therapies without consulting her." "But she abandoned Ethan," Richard protested. "Legally, she did not abandon him. She gave up custody in favor of the father, claiming it would be better for the child. That might even work in her favor, showing she put her son's well-being above her own interests." Richard left the lawyer's office feeling defeated. For the first time in his life, his money and influence didn't seem enough to solve a problem. That night, he called Sarah. He needed to at least try to explain his decision. "Hello." Her voice sounded distant. "Sarah, it's me, Richard. Can you talk?" "What do you want, Richard?" "I want to apologize and explain why I made that decision." "You don't need to explain anything. You did what you thought was best for Ethan." "No," Richard said. "I did what I thought was safest, and now I realize that wasn't the same thing." There was a pause. "How is Ethan?" Sarah asked, and Richard could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "Bad, very bad. He's regressed all the progress we had made, and the custody hearing is on Friday." "Richard, Sarah, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but would you agree to testify on my behalf? Tell the judge how much Ethan improved working with you." The line was silent for so long that Richard thought she had hung up. "All right," she finally said. "I'll testify, but not for you, for Ethan." The hearing happened on a rainy Friday in May. Richard arrived at the courthouse accompanied by Mr. Johnson, wearing his best suit, but feeling more nervous than in any business negotiation of his life. Jennifer was as elegant as ever, accompanied by a lawyer Richard knew by reputation, attorney Michael Wilson, a specialist in custody cases known for never losing. The judge, Judge Robert Thompson, was a man of about 60, with graying hair and a serious expression that gave nothing away. Attorney Michael Wilson presented Jennifer's case first. He argued that the father had made unilateral decisions about the child's treatment, introducing experimental therapies without consulting the mother. He presented photos of Ethan during one of the sessions with Sarah, where the boy appeared with his hands dirty with paint. "Your Honor," said Attorney Wilson, "my client is concerned about the unconventional methods that have been applied to the minor. The child needs stability and professional treatment, not experiments." When it was Mr. Johnson's turn, he called Richard to testify first. "Mr. Richard, can you tell us about Ethan's progress over the last few months?" Richard took a deep breath and began to talk about the changes he had observed in his son, how Ethan had started using new words, expressing himself through art, having fewer sensory meltdowns. "And who was responsible for this progress?" Mr. Johnson asked. "Sarah Miller, an arts educator who works at the Museum of Modern Art in New York." "Does this educator have specific training to work with autistic children?" Richard hesitated. This was the question he feared. "She has no formal academic training." But she has practical experience from caring for her own autistic brother. Attorney Michael Wilson stood up. Your Honor, this confirms exactly our concern. The respondent is subjecting a vulnerable child to treatments administered by a person without professional qualifications. When Sarah was called to testify, Richard felt his heart race. She was wearing a navy blue blazer and seemed much more nervous than he had ever seen her. Ms. Sarah, Mr. Johnson began, can you tell us about your work with Ethan? Sarah talked about the techniques she had developed, the progress she had observed in the boy, always keeping her voice calm and professional. But Richard could see she was tense. When it was attorney Michael Wilson's turn to question her, the lawyer went straight to the point. Ms. Sarah, what is your academic background? I have a high school diploma and a technical course in arts. Did you attend any college for psychology, education, occupational therapy? No. Are you registered with the Psychology Board or a similar body? No. So confirm for me, you have no official qualifications to work with autistic children. Sarah hesitated. I have practical experience. That is not what I asked. Attorney Michael Wilson interrupted her. Do you or do you not have official qualifications? I do not, Sarah admitted, lowering her eyes. Richard saw the moment he lost the case. Attorney Michael Wilson had managed to reduce all of Sarah's wonderful work to a question of credentials. When the judge withdrew to make his decision, Richard approached Sarah in the hallway. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I put you in this situation. He is right, Sarah said with a tired voice. I don't have official qualifications. Maybe Jennifer is right about Ethan needing real professionals. You are a real professional, Richard insisted. What you did for Ethan. Richard, Sarah interrupted him. Regardless of what happens here today, I think it's best we don't continue working together. Ethan deserves someone more qualified. Before Richard could answer, they were called back into the courtroom. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing, Judge Robert Thompson returned with an even more serious expression. After reviewing the testimony and evidence presented, the judge began, I must consider what is best for the minor, Ethan. Richard held his breath. It is undeniable that the child has shown progress with the methods applied by Ms. Sarah. It is also undeniable that this professional lacks formal credentials for the work she has been performing. Richard's heart sank. However, the judge continued, I must take into consideration that the mother, Jennifer, has been absent from the child's life for 2 years. During this period, the father assumed full responsibility for the care and treatment of the minor. Richard dared to feel a spark of hope. Therefore, my decision is to maintain custody with the father, but with certain conditions. First, any significant changes in Ethan's treatment must be communicated to his mother in advance. Second, I recommend the minor be accompanied by professionals with official training, without excluding complementary methods that have proven effective. Richard could hardly believe it. He had won, but the victory tasted bitter. The judge was essentially saying that Sarah could continue helping Ethan, but only as a supplement to official therapies. Jennifer left the courthouse visibly upset, but she couldn't appeal the decision since she had won the right to be consulted about her son's treatment. Richard tried to talk to Sarah in the parking lot, but she had already left. That night he called her several times. All the calls went straight to voicemail. In the following days, Richard tried to resume a normal routine with Ethan. He hired a certified occupational therapist and a psychologist specialized in autism. Both were competent professionals, but Ethan clearly missed Sarah. Where's Aunt Sarah? He asked every day. Richard didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that people sometimes leave even when we don't want them to? A week after the hearing, Richard received an unexpected call. Mr. Richard, this is Jason, Sarah's brother. Richard was surprised. The 15-year-old boy sounded mature for his age. Hi, Jason, is everything all right? Look, can you come to my house? I need to talk about Sarah. Richard got the address and drove to the outskirts of New York City, where Sarah lived. It was a small apartment in a housing complex, but it was impeccably clean and organized. Jason greeted him at the door. He was a tall, thin boy with the same intelligent eyes as his sister. "Sarah isn't here," Jason said. "She went to work, but I need to speak with you." They sat in the small living room. Richard noticed several paintings on the walls, all handmade, probably by Jason. "Sarah is very sad," Jason said, getting straight to the point. "She doesn't talk about it, but I know. She stays up at night thinking about Ethan." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "She told me what happened at the hearing. She said that your ex-wife's lawyer made her feel stupid for not having a degree." "Jason, your sister isn't stupid. She's the smartest person I know." "I know that, and you know that. But she's doubting herself." Jason stood up and grabbed a folder from the shelf. "Do you want to see something?" He opened the folder and showed hundreds of drawings, paintings, and notes. They were detailed records of everything Sarah had tried with him over the years, methods she had created, techniques she had adapted, progress she had documented. "She did all this by herself," Jason said. "When I was little and didn't speak, she invented a way for me to communicate through colors. When I had meltdowns, she created a breathing technique with music. She didn't learn that from any book. She learned it by loving me." Richard flipped through the records, impressed. It was years of work, meticulous and dedicated. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because Sarah is thinking of giving up. She wants to quit her job at the museum and only take the jobs that pay better. She says there's no use trying to help people if she doesn't have the right qualifications." Richard felt as if he'd been punched. "She can't do that." "Yes, she can, and she will if someone doesn't convince her otherwise." Jason closed the folder and looked directly at Richard. "Do you like my sister?" The question took Richard by surprise. What do you mean? Do you like her as a person? Not just for what she does for Ethan?" Richard hesitated. It was a question he had asked himself many times in recent weeks. "Yes," he admitted. "I like her." "Then you need to fight for her." "Because she's feeling like she's worthless, and that's making me worried." When Richard left the apartment, his mind was racing a mile a minute. Jason was right. He needed to fight for Sarah, but not just as Ethan's therapist, as the extraordinary woman she was. The next day, Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Mr. Johnson and asked him to research the recognition of alternative therapeutic methods. "Richard, where are you going with this? I want to know if there's any way to officially validate the work that Sarah does, some kind of certification or recognition." Mr. Johnson promised to research it and call back. Meanwhile, Richard went to the museum looking for Sarah. He found her in the sensory room, putting away the materials after a session with other children. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize. For real this time." Sarah continued putting away the materials without looking at him. "You didn't do anything wrong. You protected your son, as you should. I abandoned you when you needed support the most. And worse, I let that lawyer make you feel incompetent." "He didn't make me feel anything," Sarah replied. "He just told the truth. I don't have official qualifications." "Sarah, look at me." She finally stopped and looked. "You have something much more valuable than official qualifications. You have a gift, you have love, you have real experience. That's not enough in the real world, Richard. In the real world, you need papers, diplomas, licenses." Richard moved closer to her. "What if I told you there is a way to get those papers?" Sarah looked at him suspiciously. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Johnson is researching the recognition of therapeutic methods. Apparently there is indeed a path to officially validate techniques developed through practice." "Richard, no." "It's not charity," he interrupted. "It's justice. What you developed deserves to be recognized. Other children deserve to benefit from it." Sarah sat down in one of the small chairs in the room. "Why are you doing this?" Richard sat down beside her. "Because Ethan asks about you every day. Because you transformed our lives, and because I care about you." They sat in silence for a moment. "Is Ethan okay?" Sarah asked. "No," Richard admitted. "He's regressed. The therapists I hired are competent, but he clearly misses you. And Jennifer. Jennifer got what she wanted, to be consulted about decisions. But ironically, she has no real interest in participating in the day-to-day. I think she just wanted to prove a point. Sarah sighed. Richard, I don't know if I can come back. That hearing made me question everything I do. What if I told you the judge actually validated your work? He said methods proven to be effective could continue to be used as a supplement, not as the primary treatment. And what's wrong with that? Richard asked. You don't need to be the only person helping Ethan. You can be part of a team. Sarah considered his words. Does Ethan really miss me? Very much. This morning he drew a picture of you with him at the museum. It was the first drawing he's made since the hearing. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. All right, she said. I'll come back, but with a few conditions. What are they? First, I want to work together with Ethan's other therapists. No isolated sessions. I want it to be a real team. I agree. Second, I want Jennifer to be included. If she's going to be consulted anyway, I'd prefer she understands what we're doing. Richard hesitated. It was the last thing he wanted. Are you sure? I am. Ethan needs his parents to work together, not against each other. And third? Third, no partnership offers or investments until I sort out my professional situation. I want to first officially qualify myself. Richard agreed to all the conditions, even knowing that working with Jennifer would be a challenge. When he told Ethan that Sarah would be back next week, the boy had his first genuinely happy reaction in days. Aunt Sarah is coming back, he repeated several times, hopping around the house. The first meeting of Ethan's new team happened on a Monday afternoon. Present were Richard, Jennifer, Sarah, the occupational therapist Amanda, and the psychologist Dr. Emily. Jennifer arrived punctually, dressed elegantly but with a clearly skeptical expression. So you're the famous Sarah, she said, greeting her coldly. I am, and you must be Jennifer. Ethan talks about you a lot. It was a lie. Ethan rarely mentioned his mother. But Sarah was trying to start off on the right foot. Dr. Emily conducted the meeting, presenting the integrated therapy plan she had developed. Sarah would be responsible for art therapy activities and sensory stimulation. Amanda would handle traditional occupational therapy. Dr. Emily would provide the psychological follow-up. And what exactly are Sarah's qualifications to be part of this team? Jennifer asked, getting straight to the point. Dr. Emily answered before anyone else could speak. Sarah has documented practical experience and proven results with Ethan. Furthermore, she is in the process of getting certified in art therapy. Richard looked at Sarah, surprised. She hadn't mentioned that. It's true, Sarah said. I enrolled in a specialization course in art therapy last week. It's 2 years of study with a valid certification. Jennifer seemed surprised but said nothing. The first integrated session was a success. Ethan worked with Amanda on motor coordination exercises, with Dr. Emily on communication exercises, and with Sarah on artistic expression. For the first time, all the activities were connected, reinforcing each other. Jennifer observed everything from a distance, taking notes in a notebook. At the end of the session, she approached Sarah. I have to admit, she said, Ethan really responds well to your work. Thank you. May I ask why you decided to come back now? Jennifer hesitated before answering. Because I feel guilty. When Ethan received the diagnosis, I panicked. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought it would be better to let Richard take care of it, since he seemed more capable. And now? Now I realize I ran away from my responsibility, and that I may have lost 2 important years of my son's life. Sarah saw sincerity in Jennifer's eyes for the first time. It's never too late to start over, she said. Ethan needs his mother. In the following months, the family's routine stabilized. Ethan had therapy 3 times a week, always with the full team. Jennifer began to participate more actively, even taking a course for parents of autistic children. Richard noticed that the tension between him and Jennifer had decreased significantly. They didn't become a couple again, but they managed to become partners in raising their son. Sarah dedicated herself intensely to her art therapy studies. Her grades were excellent, and she quickly became one of the standout students in the course. One evening, after a particularly productive session where Ethan had managed to paint a portrait of the complete family, including Jennifer, Richard invited Sarah to dinner. "It's just to celebrate Ethan's progress," he said, trying to sound casual. They went to a small, cozy restaurant in downtown New York City. During dinner, they talked about everything: Ethan's progress, Sarah's studies, the future. "Have you thought about what you'll do after you graduate?" Richard asked. "I have. I want to keep working with neurodivergent children, maybe open my own practice one day." "And what about that idea of an alternative therapy center?" Sarah smiled. "I still think about it, but now I want to do everything right, with qualifications, registration, all official." "What if I said I'm willing to wait?" Sarah looked at him curiously. "Wait for what?" "Wait for you to graduate. Wait for you to feel ready. For the center and maybe for other things." There was something in Richard's voice that made Sarah understand he wasn't just talking about business. "Richard, I know it's complicated. I know our situation isn't conventional, but these months have made me realize you're not just Ethan's therapist. You are someone very special to me." Sarah stayed silent for a long moment. "Richard, I'm very fond of you and I admire you, but our relationship started because of Ethan. How can we know if what we feel is real or just a consequence of the circumstances?" It was a fair question, and Richard didn't have an easy answer. "There's only one way to find out," he said, "by giving it time." They decided to continue as they were, focused on Ethan's well-being, but open to what the future might bring. 6 months later, Sarah was in the middle of her art therapy course, and Ethan had made impressive progress. He could now express his feelings through words, tolerated changes in his routine, and had even made a few friends at the special school he attended. Jennifer had changed too. She had become a more present and understanding mother. She and Richard had reached a custody agreement that worked well for everyone. One day, Sarah received an unexpected call at the museum. "Sarah Miller?" asked a woman's voice. "Yes, speaking." "This is Dr. Catherine Peters from the Integrated Therapy Institute. We'd like to speak with you about a special project." Sarah was intrigued. The Institute was one of the most respected organizations in the country in the field of therapies for people with disabilities. "What kind of project?" "We're developing a pilot program of art therapy for children on the autism spectrum. We heard about your work and would like to invite you to join the team." Sarah could hardly believe it. It was the opportunity she had dreamed of. "But I'm still finishing my degree," she said. "We know, but we're looking for people with proven practical experience. You could continue your studies while working with us." When Sarah told Richard the news, he was genuinely happy for her. "It's an incredible opportunity," he said. "You deserve it. But it means I might have less time for Ethan." "Ethan is doing well now. He can continue with Dr. Emily and Amanda, and you can keep 1 session a week for supervision." It was the perfect solution. Sarah accepted the Institute's offer and began working on the pilot project. The program was a success from the start. Sarah developed techniques that combined art, music, and sensory stimuli, all based on what she had learned with Jason and Ethan. 6 months later, the program caught the attention of international experts. Sarah was invited to present her work at an international conference in Chicago. Richard accompanied her on the trip. It was the first time they had traveled together, and he was nervous. "I have something to tell you," he said on the plane. "What is it?" "Jennifer is dating a doctor she met in the parenting course." Sarah smiled. "That's good. She deserves to be happy." "And do I deserve to be happy too?" Richard asked, looking directly at her. "Everyone deserves to be happy. Sarah, these 2 years have completely changed my life. Ethan is well, my relationship with Jennifer has been resolved, but the most important thing is that I met you." Sarah held his hand. "Richard, let me finish. I've fallen in love with you. Not with Ethan's therapist, not with the person who helped us. I've fallen in love with the Sarah who works 3 jobs to take care of her brother. For the Sarah who never gives up. For the Sarah who sees beauty where others see a problem." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "I fell in love with you too," she said, "for the father who abandoned an important meeting to be with his son in crisis, for the man who respected me even when it would have been easier to use me, for the Richard who discovered there is something more important than money." They kissed right there, at 30,000 feet, discovering that love sometimes arises in the most unlikely circumstances. Sarah's presentation in Chicago was an absolute success. Experts from all over the world wanted to learn about her techniques. Job offers came from various universities and institutes. "Are you going to accept any of these offers?" Richard asked, worried. "No," Sarah answered. "My place is in the United States. There's a lot of work to be done here." Back in New York City, Richard made a decision he had been planning for months. "Sarah, are you still interested in that idea for the therapy center?" "Of course. Why?" "Because I found the perfect location, and now you have the qualification that was missing." He took her to see a building in the Upper East Side, near the museum where it had all begun. "Richard, this is huge," Sarah said, impressed. "There's space for offices, activity rooms, even a small auditorium for courses and lectures. It must cost a fortune." "It's already bought," Richard said, handing the keys to her. "What do you mean?" "It's yours. My graduation gift." Sarah looked at him in shock. "Richard, I can't accept this." "Of course you can, but there's one condition." "What is it?" "I want to be your partner, not as an investor, as your life partner." Richard knelt down right there, in the middle of the empty room, and took a ring from his pocket. "Sarah Miller, will you marry me?" Sarah was speechless for a moment. Then she started to cry and laugh at the same time. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times, yes." 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony in the sensory room of the museum where they met. Ethan was the ring bearer, Jason the best man. Jennifer was there with her new boyfriend, genuinely happy for them. The Sarah Miller Integrated Therapy Center opened 1 year later. It became a national reference for caring for neurodivergent children. Ethan, now 8 years old, was one of the happiest and most communicative children in his school. He had inspired the creation of a special inclusion program that benefited dozens of other children. Jason graduated in music and began teaching at the center, developing music therapy techniques to complement his sister's work. Jennifer married Dr. Brian and became one of the country's biggest advocates for the rights of people with autism. She and Richard developed a genuine friendship, united by their love for their son. One afternoon, almost 3 years after that first meeting at the museum, Richard found Sarah in the center's office, organizing papers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, hugging her from behind. "I'm thinking about how our lives have changed. Remember the day Ethan had that crisis at the museum?" "I remember. I thought the world was ending. And now?" Richard looked out the window, where Ethan was playing in the garden with other children, all different, all special, all happy. "Now I know it was actually just beginning." Sarah turned in his arms. "You know what's most amazing? It all started with Ethan crying. And now he's one of the happiest children I know." "And it's not just him," Richard said. "Jason is living his dream of being a musician. Jennifer found love. You became the professional you always dreamed of being. And you? What did you get?" Richard kissed her gently. "I got a real family. Not just Ethan and you, but Jason, Jennifer, all the children who come through here. I found a purpose greater than making money." Sarah smiled. "And I managed to prove that love and dedication are worth more than any diploma." "Although the diploma was also important," Richard joked. "True, but I already knew the main thing, that every child is unique and deserves to be understood in their own way." That evening, during a family dinner, Richard, Sarah, Ethan, and Jason, Ethan made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I'm going to be a therapist like Aunt Sarah when I grow up," he said, with the conviction that only children have. "Why, son?" Richard asked. "Because I want to help other kids like me. I want to show that being different isn't a bad thing." Sarah exchanged an emotional look with Richard. Ethan had learned the greatest lesson of all, that his differences weren't defects, they were characteristics that made him special. "You are going to be an excellent therapist," Sarah said, because you understand what it's like to be on the other side. And you'll have the best team helping you, Richard added. Your mother, your stepfather, your aunts and uncles. Ethan smiled in that special way that could light up any room. Family, he said, a word that had become his favorite. Yes, family. Not the traditional family that Richard had imagined when Ethan was born, but a chosen family, built with love, patience, and a lot of understanding, a family that was born from a moment of crisis and transformed into something beautiful, a family that proved every day that love finds a way to flourish, even in the most unexpected circumstances. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story about overcoming challenges and true love. Ethan managed to turn his difference into a strength, and Sarah proved that the heart teaches more than any diploma. Leave a comment telling us which part touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will touch your soul.